l'éducation et l'Europe. Vous avez aussi souhaité tous les deux, en fin d'émission, disposer d'une carte blanche pour évoquer le thème de votre choix.
Alors notre rôle sera de veiller sur la stricte égalité de votre temps de parole et également
Vous êtes également suivre ce débat sous-titré sur TF1,
At home, you will
France 2,
also be able to
LCI
follow
et France
this
Info, et
subtitled
en
on
langue des
various
signes
French
sur l'antenne
channels,
de France
including
Info et le
a
site
sign
internet
language
de LCI.
translation
Alors le
on
tirage au sort vous a
LCI.
désigné Marine Le Pen pour commencer.
The
C'est
random
donc
selection has
Emmanuel
given
Macron qui conclurait.
Et avant
the
de
first
vous
word to Marine Le
nous
Pen.
intéresser à vos
Emmanuel Macron will be
propositions,
finishing
une
up. But
première
before
question.
we move to what you have
Après
to say,
des
we
mois
have a
de
first
campagne,
question for you.
à
After
4
months of
jours
campaigning,
de son retour
we are
et à
only
10
4 days
jours
away
de
from the
votre
vote and
investiture,
10
si
days
vous êtes
away
élu.
from
Quel est
you
votre
taking
état
office.
d'esprit? Et donc,
How are you feeling? Marine Le Pen.
Well, I have to say that I'm very pleased about the way in which this second round runoff vote is proceeding, because in fact the political choice that the French people will have to make is clear. Mr. Macron is the candidate of Uberization, wild globalization, insecurity, social brutality, the war of all against all, the economic ransacking of our large corporations, major interests sweeping low on our interests, all this run by Mr. Hollande, who's in the driving seat. Mr. Cazeneuve said, I think yesterday, vote in favour for Mr. Macron. Do that with the sense of pride of what we've accomplished and the desire of that to continue. So I'm the candidate of the people, I'm the candidate of France as we love it, of its culture, its civilization, its unity. I am the candidate of the nation that protects our jobs, that protects the security of our fellow citizens, our borders, protects us against unfair international competition and the rise of Islamic fundamentalism. And of course, the French people have been able to say the real Macron in this second round. The benevolence has been replaced by spite. The marketing strategy has been taken over by the Socialist Party, and the wry smile is being replaced by a grin after the rallies and the rounding of elites. Mr. Macron has dropped the mask. I think it's useful. We've seen the choices that you've made in this second round, choices that are cynical choices, the use of campaign arguments that are shameful and that reveal perhaps the coldness of the business banker that you've never stopped being, perhaps. So I think that this period, in actual fact, of clarification was profoundly useful to the French people to decide.
Mr. Macron, would you now like to tell us about your state of mind?
You have shown that you're not the candidate of the spirit of finesse or the will to have a balanced and open democratic debate. Thank you for this wonderful demonstration that you've just given us. I wasn't expecting anything else. I'm not going to say that you're the real heiress, not only of a name, of a political party, of the French extreme right, of a whole system that has prospered on the anger of the French for so many years. I'm not going to repeat that you claim this heritage because you have been promoting it since you took over the control of this party. And over 40 years in this country, we've had LePens who have been candidates for the presidential election. I'm not interested in all that. You will continue with your logorrhea as you do day after day. The question that our citizens have to answer today is, do they want the spirit of defeatism that you promote? Because you promote the spirit of defeatism. You explain to our fellow citizens that globalization is too tough, Europe is too tough, so we're going to withdraw, we're going to get out of the euro, get out of Europe, we're going to put the walls up. That is the spirit of defeatism in the fight against terrorism, this fight. All developed countries are facing, all democracies are facing this war. You say, no, we're going to withdraw, we're going to restore the borders of the past, as if that will solve the problem. In the face of this defeatism, I am defending the spirit of French conquest. France has always succeeded and succeeded in the world because her language is spoken on all the continents of the world. France's history, France's civilization, its strength is that its reputation is global. And today we are the fifth economic power in the world. We are strong in the world. And there are a lot of changes that need to be done. And I want to introduce changes, and it's the incapacity, the inability of governments for 30 years to do so. I have never been president or prime minister. I will do as much as I can to remedy that. But these deep changes that I want and which led me to resign from the government when I was a minister, I intend to implement these reforms so that the spirit of conquest will triumph. That's the France I want. That's the France that resembles us.
We can jump right into the debate with economy and unemployment. First of all, Mrs. Le Pen, you believe that the current labour laws are holding back employment. You want to get rid of the so-called Encomerie law, whereas Mr. Macron, you want to reform labour law from this summer with an executive order. Mr. Macron, a few minutes for you.
The problem of France for 30 years has been the unemployment rate. We have had mass unemployment for 30 years. We're the only country in Europe that hasn't succeeded in putting an end to this high unemployment. Youth unemployment is very high, and in the face of this, we must give to our small and medium-sized enterprises the possibility of creating more jobs, of being more agile, of adapting to economic cycles. That's why I want to simplify things. I want to simplicity, to create the right to making mistakes. It's a reform that I will introduce this summer. When the government administration controls, it mustn't sanction, it must support and explain. Craftsmen, small and medium-sized businesses are the main victims of complexity, administrative, and I want to get rid of, for self-employed and independent workers, the certain social contributions. I want the labour law not to be the same, determined by a law which is too rigid. I want a labour law that can revert to agreements at corporate level, at company level, or at branch level, at the sector level. A company that can negotiate a majority agreement with the representatives of the employees to reorganize will be in a better position to face the risks, the economic risks, the competition that it is facing. And that's how large companies have saved jobs in this country, because large companies are the only ones that have the ability to do that. So pragmatism for small and medium-sized enterprises, and in the face of economic cycles which are much shorter.
So more flexibility.
Yes, more agility for businesses and security for employees, workers, which call for new reforms, a reform of unemployment insurance, a reform of vocational training to protect people in the middle of these changes.
Mrs. Le Pen, how do you see the labour market going forward?
Well, Mr. Economy Minister, or should I say Mr. Advisor of Hollande.
And what's your vision of the labour market?
4 years you led Hollande's economy policy. If you have the recipe for unemployment,
we are candidates for 5 years.
Why didn't you allow Hollande to benefit from your recipes? If you have no recipes because your results were, in the case, extremely bad, in the case of unemployment, why are you standing for election as the president? That's the only question we need to ask, because you had a free hand to implement that policy, and that policy was catastrophic. It was catastrophic. Why? Because you did the only thing you know how to do, is that you help large businesses. The employment tax credit, you gave it to large companies, small and medium-sized businesses that wanted to see a lightening of their difficulties, to give them some oxygen. You pretended they didn't exist because you wanted to, didn't want to scrap the posted worker directive. It's 500,000 jobs that are not available to French people because they're filled by foreign posted workers who are frauding or not, because those who do defraud are as many as those who don't. You didn't put in place a one-stop shop, better administrative arrangements, economic patriotism. That horrifies you. So anything that can give an advantage to French companies, you're against, because you are France that subjects itself to the EU, unfair international competitions. The farmers didn't see you support them against this unfair competition. The industrialists didn't. Oh yes, a number of large corporations saw you. Those are the ones who were bought out by large US corporations to the detriment of national interest, Alstom, Technip, and there was a whole series of many with rather problematic conflicts of interest with the former bank at which you work. So you don't have a national spirit. You don't think in the superior interest of the nation. I'll always blame you for that. You're defending private interests. The French people are aware of that. The problem is behind that. There's a lot of hardship at Whirlpool. There are companies that are offshoring. And that it's not an anecdote, Mr. Macron. These are companies that you've sold. SFR, for example, to your friend Mr. Draghi, the head of BFM. 6,000 jobs lost.
For 3 minutes, Madame Le Pen has been explaining her strategy for fighting unemployment in France. There isn't one. Your strategy...
I've given you everything. I've told you everything you haven't done.
Madame Le Pen, what's extraordinary is that your strategy, and it's normal, for decades this has been going on, your strategy is quite simply to lie a lot and to list all the difficulties and problems of the country, but you don't propose anything. If you had observed what has happened in recent years, the charges paid by the tax credit for competitiveness benefits
very well,
all
small
companies.
businesses didn't benefit from that.
That's why in my project I propose to cut the charges which are paid by small and medium-sized enterprises. I want to cut corporation tax.
All companies, including for the large companies, whereas I give total priority to small businesses. They're the ones that create jobs. You're making life easier for big business again. It's normal, they're your friends. Where you have drinks at La Rotonde.
The French deserve better than this. They deserve the truth, not insinuations. You say you are very well informed. You know reality is very... I was not a minister when SFR was sold, and it belonged to a totally private
company. Oh, really?
You
were minister? You told that lie in front of 10,000 people at the debate we had. When that question was asked of you. Of course you were minister. You were leading all these issues. And what Mr. Montebourg refused for SFR be sold to Mr. Draghi, the day Mr. Montebourg was replaced by you, Mr. Macron, well, immediately you signed the deed of sale. That's the truth.
Mrs. Le Pen, SFR belonged to a private group called Vivendi. We are in the state where we respect private property. It's the Vivendi group that sold SFR. So you're making a lot of mistakes. You have been... and it doesn't help the country to move on. Nobody wanted to sell SFR. When you have a private group which is owned by private capital, look in your files.
Yes, I'll find that for you immediately.
I know the files
January
very well.
2015, before Parliament. I took the decision for Alstom. You said to Mr. Dupont-Aignan, it's not me. January 2015, before Parliament, I have the decision to allow G to take a stake in Alstom. I personally.
Mrs. Le Pen, you're not talking about the same subject. You're talking about General Electric and Alstom.
The day after Mr. Montebourg left, you granted, whereas they were receiving the sale of SFR. That's the reality. Why don't you just accept it? Accept it. That's what you do best, to break up companies and do M&A. You can do that very well. There's no difficulty.
You're reading a file that does not correspond to the case we were discussing, which shows that you are not well prepared.
Sold against the interests of France.
General Electric Alstom, Mr. Montebourg fought very hard. We can look at the details of the file as you are mixing the different files up. One is SFR is in telephony, and the other one makes turbines and industrial equipment. It isn't the same sector. You're mixing the two sectors.
You can sell everything. The only problem is that you can sell everything, but not to the benefit of the national interest.
Fighting against unemployment calls for in-depth reforms. You can shake things up.
El Khomri law, deregulation, deregulation, etc. That's what you want to do.
Madame Le Pen doesn't want to talk about substantive matters. She wants to talk about the past. What we need today, and I say, is simplicity for small and medium-sized enterprise. I propose we need to have more pragmatism. We need to have a policy in favor of investment. It is indispensable to fight against unemployment. There is no fatality. You are not proposing anything to fight against unemployment. Your knowledge of the files is very approximative. I propose to create jobs for self-employed people, SMEs, and large companies.
We'd like to hear your suggestions on something that's very important to the French people. The working week. It seems like neither of you in your political platform have decided to change the 35-hour working week. Mrs. Le Pen, you're okay with 35 hours?
Well, I want negotiations to happen by sector. Mr. Macron wants negotiations to take place by company. It's fratricidal. It's fratricidal because, of course, negotiation by company is to pit companies one against the other. You're going to take unfair national competition, whereas they're suffering unfair international competition. You know full well that in the sectors, there'll be the large companies that, of course, will be able to adjust the working time, but not the small companies. So, obviously, they'll go under. That's your plan. The big eat the small. It's the law of the fittest of the strongest. I'm opposed to that. If negotiations happen, they have to be by sector and not by company. I note, for that matter, that Mr. Macron wants to have an El Khomri law to the power of 10 by executive order. We don't quite know what's in it. I assume there'll be the scrapping of the indefinite term contract or the roadmap of the EU, and you're ticking the boxes with a great deal of discipline. You're very disciplined. You're very disciplined in respect of the EU. Yeah, okay, but this outright deregulation, this breakup of labor laws, obviously will be a policy that creates more precariousness, not jobs, but additional unemployment, as long as we don't change the economic model defended by the system that is behind you, Mr. Macron, of all the socialist ministers who are supporting you, Mr. Le Foll, Madame Royal, Taubira, Mr. Cazeneuve.
I'm waiting for your answer on the 35-hour week.
I know you're trying. Yeah.
It's interesting you're not answering the question.
You're trying to get us to forget that you were part of a government that implemented the El Khomri law. Once again, that made labour even more precarious, didn't create any jobs, but higher unemployment since you left the government than when you joined. But I see there that you refuse to assume responsibility for that.
Thank you for your implicit homage to me.
I know once again that you don't want to assume that responsibility. So the measures you're recommending today, okay, we've seen what they are. If you say, right, we're going to do that, but worse, well, I say that obviously we must radically turn our backs on that policy, and we must have a policy that protects jobs and that develops small businesses, because they're the ones that create jobs in our country.
Mr. Macron, your turn to speak. You are not questioning that 35-hour work week.
What's extraordinary is that you never answer the questions. You're always talking about the past and about other people. The French will understand that you have nothing to propose. It's wonderful. I'm listening to you. You talk about everything and about nothing.
I answered that.
I'm answering the question, which is, and I want to know, what are small and medium-sized enterprises asking for? You asked the business leaders. They want more visibility. They want, whatever their size, I'm not talking only about large groups. The large groups manage competitiveness very well. The medium in size, from very small to very large businesses, they want more adaptation to economic reality. A business in the construction sector, which has 2 employees, doesn't have the same experience as a digital startup or an automobile company which has 500 employees. So we must give them the possibility of negotiating a majority agreement at corporate level. Only large companies can do so today in certain circumstances. The shipbuilding yards in Saint-Nazaire save jobs by negotiating an agreement.
You sold them to the Italians. I'm sorry you sold them to the Italians.
I didn't sell the shipbuilding yard. They almost disappeared 2 years ago. They signed an agreement with the unions. There was part-time work, and they then had a good order book. They weren't sold to anyone. I was in the presidential campaign at the time. You can attribute me all the sins for the last 30 years. I've been involved in politics for a much shorter time than you.
No, it's been a while that this deal was in the offing.
You have a big problem with industrial issues. You don't know the files at all.
It's been a while since this file was on your
For
desk.
my part, I signed contracts for ships to be built in those shipyards. And I say quite simply, they signed those agreements which created more flexibility and preserved jobs. That's what I want for other businesses, and this is what business leaders are asking for. I'm also in favor, notably for the smallest companies, there should be sectorial agreements. A business with 2 employees does not negotiate corporate agreements because there are no trade unions. The small retailers, the small business leaders, it's at the sectorial level that we can negotiate more flexibility of labor laws which will allow people to hire people more easily. We need to, our economy needs to make hiring more simple.
There are large and small, not just small companies.
And you're also in favor of sectorial agreements, but we must allow the small and large companies to sign these agreements. And that's what will revitalize our economy and will stop the destruction of jobs like in the recession in 2009.
So you assume that it's the employment labor code that creates unemployment. That's a strange vision. I mean, my principle, and this is confirmed by the small businesses, and I see far many than you do, because around my table, there are small businesses, around your table, very often big business. You don't show contempt for the employees of Whirlpool. They gave me a very good welcome. They know that my plan defends them because they know what is killing them off. It's your policy, the policy of unfair competition, such that the state, as strategist, doesn't intervene. The big eat the small. Companies go off seeking workers, low-cost workers, as was the case. But I'm offering them to tax companies that relocate. They will no longer relocate abroad if they don't have profits, if they have no benefit to go to a country where wages are very low. If they're taxed, when they re-import their products, then they will no longer leave because there'll be no financial interest in it for them. That's the first thing. Secondly, I want to put in place a sovereign fund that will allow us to intervene in case such as Vivart that has been broken up by vulture funds. The state must intervene and trust a sovereign fund to business leaders to have the 2 qualities, the state duration and the private sector of efficiency, with offering reasonable yields when you consider once again that the law of the toughest of the strongest must apply, and it's normal that companies break one another up. That's what you organized when you were at the head of the bank.
We should push forward, Mr. Macron.
There's something which is called the Agency for State Shareholding, which means the state can invest in a company. When Peugeot was under threat, the state increased its share of the capital to save the company.
Well, you see, I'm proposing it.
It's interesting because you're in great solutions.
So this is a sovereign fund that I would entrust to business leaders.
Already exists. The Public Investment Bank
It's
already
not a
exists.
bank that I want, it's a sovereign fund. Miss, don't play with me. I see that you're trying to play with me, the teacher and the pupil, but it's not my thing.
The country deserves a better debate. In the case of Whirlpool, what you propose is nothing. First of all, you don't respect people. You don't respect people. I heard the anger of people. I spent hours with the workers of Whirlpool. You spent 15 minutes on the parking lot of Whirlpool. You didn't even go into the company premises.
Where you were protected from journalists, without the journalists, with your personal camera.
I met the employees, and that is what it means to respect people. When you were playing to the cameras, I was with the representatives of the employees because I respect them. And you know what? They understood that you don't propose anything to them.
They booed you. They booed you. And they said, out, out, because they know that my campaign, I spoke about them.
You don't propose anything to them. They're angry.
I shed the light.
And in the evening, you issued a communiqué, a statement, proposing the nationalization of Whirlpool.
That it be protected by the state until a buyer is found.
Some of you have had problems. That was the mistake Mr. Hollande made with Florange.
And you went to see them and say, right, globalization, that's what globalization is like. We'll give you some
training. I told them that I'm going to fight for reinvestment in their site. I'm going to fight so that you have...
You're really not credible on this, Mr. Macron. Do you realize that?
I am much more credible than you are because I am not being cynically fueling
That's not what the employees of
If you please, we must push forward.
I have had a number of victories and a number of failures, but I have always fought.
Victories to protect jobs or victories to protect companies that are buying each other up and scaling back?
We have saved a lot of companies.
If you would please listen to us for 2 minutes, we do have...
I have never done what you did the other day to take advantage of the distress of the workers.
I never went to hide in a room with trade union representatives. I go and see the workers. The workers. With the workers, not to hide in a small room.
If you please.
That's the big difference between us.
We cannot dwell on this for too long. We can't hear ourselves think anymore. We need to push forward. There will be other opportunities to come back to the issues that the French people are facing. We'll be talking about taxes and purchasing power. Many French people are expressing their frustration with the current tax system. Mr. Macron, what is your opinion on this frustration?
What I propose is to make savings in order to cut taxes paid by households and companies. We must be clear. If we don't make any savings, we can't promise tax cuts. That's a promise that is not credible. I know that that's what Marine Le Pen does, but people aren't that stupid. So the state today has a deficit, which is not a good thing for us. The state and all public administrations have a deficit. So I want to make 70 billion euros of savings in order to cut taxes and charges paid by companies, to reduce the charges paid by businesses 6 points down and 10 points lower charges for the minimum wage, and to reduce the corporate income tax to 25%. So I propose for the households to get rid of the residence tax for 80% of our fellow citizens, which represents 10 billion euros. So I cut the taxes paid by businesses. I cut also what citizens pay, residents pay, and this is my fiscal policy. If growth is better than I expect, I'm very cautious. I have very cautious 1.8% growth. I hope we can go beyond that. Then I will reallocate the savings to cutting income tax and for the benefit of households.
Mrs. Le Pen, your suggestions when it comes to tax system, is this frustration something that you felt when you were visiting people?
So you're assuming a responsibility. You didn't take part in the major economic decisions. Very good. Okay, you were a member of a government that generated an additional 35 billion in taxes, 35 billion of additional taxes during the 5-year term, but it's not you, not you.
I have never been in charge of that.
So you want to reduce the residence tax. Okay, I'm happy with that. For small residence tax, 10 billion, you want to increase the social contribution by 15 points for pensioners and workers. Mr. Pisani-Ferry, one of your advisors, said clearly 60% of pensioners will have to pay more.
We need your response to what Mr. Macron said.
What do I do? I cut by 3 points the wage charges of all those who work. Why? Because today, when you get your pay slip, your gross salary, and then you have your social contributions. I will reduce those contributions by 3 points because I want to go as far as I can. I want universal insurance, employment insurance, so that everybody can have indemnities if they are unemployed. So I will be getting rid for all workers of their employee social contribution, and I will replace that by an increase in CSG. All those who work, craftsmen, self-employed people, entrepreneurs, farmers, retailers, civil servants, employees, they will have a gain in purchasing power because the rise in the CSG will be lower than the fall in charges. Their purchasing power will increase. The 40% of people who have the lowest retirement pensions and pay the low rates of CSG will pay less. And 60% of retirees who pay the normal rate will have an increase of the CSG of 1.7 points. And the wealthier of the wealthiest will, in order to have a more smarter system, there is no magic in finance.
You're 4 minutes ahead.
So I will take the 4 minutes. All the other retirees, this rise will be offset by getting rid of the residence tax.
The residence tax that you're giving with the right hand, the fact you're taking back with the left hand through a tax. But since you're a socialist, you're going to say, well, it costs nothing, it's the state that pays.
I'm not saying that. Let me tell you the truth. Everybody will have an increase in purchasing power, except the richest retirees.
Well, obviously, Mr. Macron obviously criticizes for this. I have very significant measures to boost spending power through a reduction of 10% of the first 3 income tax brackets by increasing the benefits for widowers that were scrapped by the socialists because they could have made an effort on that by making overtime hours free of tax, clear measures for purchasing power, bonuses for employment below 1,500 euros that I finance through imports and not via tax, reduced energy prices down 5% because there have been successive hikes that are weighing on the budget of families. I'm boosting small pensions because you're going to knock the
No, I will be increasing the small retirement
pensions. They're
pensions.
in a situation for many of them that is really terrible. They just can't make ends meet, and they continue to bear the brunt of additional measures and sacrifices. You said, right, housing benefit. We're not going to continue to fund 20 million of these housing benefits. If you reduce that, well, you see that there are some who will no longer be able to find a home. And for the young people, the under 27s, they need to have their housing benefit increased by 25%. And also, I'm thinking of the families. You're not really thinking much about the families. The families by restoring family benefit, family allowance. That was cut. The government that you were a member of, the socialist government that reduced that, and to revert to universal child allowance, that for all the families have had to bear the brunt of all the measures of the government that you took part in on their budget. Yes, I mean, that's the principle of universality, absolutely. So, you see, I mean, I'm the candidate of spending power. You, Mr. Macron, you're the candidate of the power to buy France, to break it up, but it's important to know the philosophy. Everything's for sale, everything's can be bought, men can be bought and sold. And Mr. Berger, one of your supporters, mentioned you only see human relations in terms of what it brings in terms of the dividends that can be derived from that. It's not at all my vision. I believe that giving the efforts that are made by volunteers in association helpers, 8 million that I'll turn to give an additional trimester. Otherwise, the 8 million helpers wouldn't be able to bear that cost. The voluntary sector that's often forgotten, that's one of the key components of our French identity. You realize, in my vision, Mr. Macron, not everything is for sale, not everything is bought, not everything is the subject of a financial measure, financial statistics. France is far more than
You're
that.
right. France is something quite different. It's an open civilization with generous principles, the reverse of everything you represent. It's not your vision of families. It's what your father repeated a few days ago in an unworthy way. And the constant battle that you have fought in the European Parliament, cutting credits for family planning. So you're not well placed to talk about the family. Your vision of the family is not that of the French family. I have a question to ask you. How do you finance all that?
Well, I'll find savings for you immediately. Take a look. The EU, 9 billion euros a year. That can fund.
6 billion.
You
6
forget the
billion
excise customs duties.
on average.
You forget customs duties. So, in fact, you're less technical than what you seem to indicate. You're not as aware of that.
We'll be coming to savings in just a few minutes. Let's talk about tax.
We have a long list of the generous reforms of Madame Le Pen, how is she going to finance all that? How is she going to fund all that?
It's their money, giving it back to the French people. It's their money. It's not you that generates that money. It's not the government.
Mrs. Le Pen.
It's their money.
Who are you going to take the money from? Where are you going to find the money
legitimate.
to finance all
Emmanuel
that?
Macron and Marine Le Pen.
The European Union.
You need
150
billion euros.
Immigration. A colossal cost. I've only kept 15 billion per year in savings. I was very reasonable in my calculations. There's social fraud against you haven't fought.
Oh, it's going to stop overnight. As soon as you're president, people will stop cheating and there will be no more tax fraud overnight. Overnight. Wonderful. Fantastic. I don't want to even try that.
I'll show you what I can do to find social fraud.
I don't want to try, and I don't think the French want to try either with you.
Don't speak on their behalf.
I'm not speaking on their behalf.
But you're chosen by default by a whole set of people, so you need to show a little less arrogance before the election.
I take the French as adults. They are adults. I don't lie to them. And you lie.
Seems to me that you
a lot.
Tried to treat them as children a little.
You have just drawn up a long list of reforms, and you don't say how you will fund them. The day you obtain your 6 billion savings from the EU, but we have to pay what we owe the EU. Look what the UK is going to have to do with Brexit. It will have to pay between 60 and 80 billion euros. From the very beginning, it will have to pay between 60 and 80 billion euros at the beginning of Brexit. So leaving the euro, leaving the EU will cost money. We can talk about the euro later.
Something we'll come to.
But you don't fund what you promise. I want our fellow citizens, in regard to the list that you have just, the people who are helping others, the non-profit organizations, I will support them. And how will I've told you how I will finance the tax cuts and the lowering of charges. You're going to give presents, you're going to give gifts. But somebody will have to pay for your reforms. You don't say how you're going to fund things. You your project is not open to...
Return money to the French people is a present.
I'm not
you
going to
rather
give it
give
to
it to-
anybody. When you cut taxes,
Your
when you
friends,
cut
the financial
taxes,
powers?
if you haven't cut expenditure, everybody
I
can
cut spending
understand
that
that.
you don't want to touch.
If you please, we'll get back to this.
So either you're going to increase the deficit and then have recourse to financial, or increase taxes during your 5-year mandate, or increase the debt, and then it's the future generations, our children, who will pay. And
You did 300 billion in debt. if I'm
We'll
not
get back to
mistaken.
this.
Oh, it's tough, really, to
I assume totally the
assume
results
one's
of
record.
my government.
Let's not go round in circles. We will come back to this.
Madame Le Pen is blaming me for everything that's gone wrong over the last
The
20
4
years.
years that you were advisor and minister is not enough. Start by doing that. You know that it's a work of truth and honesty to assume before the French people the results.
I assume the responsibility for what I did as a minister. You're attributing things to me which I didn't do. You're attributing things to me that happened before I was minister, and you are lying. You are lying,
Let's push forward.
like all extremists, by the way.
Emmanuel Macron, you are far ahead.
Why are you having to
time.
insulting your opponent?
I'm not
It's
insulting
surprising.
you. If somebody has been insulting, it has been you.
I don't think I use the slightest insult.
When you say I don't respect the body of a woman by referring to Mr. Berger and uterine
With the
We
surrogate
weren't coming to
motherhood.
assisted reproductive technology.
motherhood, it's a lie. I have always been against motherhood,
The surrogate motherhood that's happening elsewhere, that in fact that's endorsed in France. In fact, you're creating such networks abroad. It's despicable in terms of selling the human body, but it's cynical and
I'm
hypocritical.
against surrogate motherhood completely. When you have a child in France, you prefer not to recognize any rights for that child. I don't believe in that. I believe in generosity.
Okay, let's push forward. Marine Le Pen,
Price of selling.
I'm against commercialization of
Modern slavery.
I'm against a child being made to suffer.
Well, he can benefit from guardianship.
But the child will be able to die in the street because he will not have any help, or she will not have any help. A wonderful
we would like...
society.
Marine Le Pen, you have a lot of time left
Let's
to
be
you.
serious here.
Your project is not serious.
Let's get back to something that's very interesting to all of the people watching. Social protection. I would like to know what advances you want to have in reimbursement by the social security system. Mrs. Le Pen, first of all.
I want to save the social protection system first off. The reality is today this protection system is in danger. You've seen that the goal is to seek to dismantle it in some shape or form. We're talking about funding here. Mr. Macron, you made a whole set of proposals of reimbursement for eyewear, etc., but you remained extremely vague. What is it, the eyewear? The whole spectacles, at what level? We won't know more before the election. What's for sure, once again, a lot of savings to be made without reducing the benefits that are granted, notably through progress and the use of digital technology with unit selling of medicines. That's not in place. That could be put in place very simply. And over and above social protection, there's the healthcare offering. Obviously, we're faced with the difficulty of desertification. In many of our country areas, sometimes you have to travel 50, 60 kilometers in order to find perhaps not a GP, but sometimes a specialist, sometimes 4 to 6 months to get an appointment. So there are measures there. Once again, the clear measures to be put in place to increase the quota of doctors that you didn't change when you were in power. We don't have enough doctors. We have to find doctors abroad by, of course, depriving those countries from that healthcare offering that we seek from them. We have to put in place 6-month junior doctor stays in areas that are deprived. We have to cut taxes for doctors who've retired to encourage them to stay on for a few years.
More things will be reimbursed. You talked about hearing aids, you talked about teeth replacements and eye care. Are you saying that we are going to get more reimbursed?
Above all, we'll ensure that medicines drop, the price of medicine drop, because if we can cut the cost of medicine, then we'll reimburse more. In that case, we'll be able to use that money to reimburse things today that are paid by our fellow citizens. And of course, we need to have go head-to-head with Big Pharma on this. I was told it wasn't possible, but I saw that it's possible to cut the price of a medicine that was hugely expensive. The price was reduced almost by a third or half, so that's considerable. So at some point, it's all about political resolve. That political will no longer exist because we're in the hands of Big Pharma, Big Finance, and people with private interests behind that. You have them in your team, someone with private interests who used to work at Servier. Yes. Well, we were surprised. We saw in Mr. Macron's there was a reimbursement of high blood pressure. Why high blood pressure? Because his health advisor, in fact, was one of the biggest lobbyists of Servier, and Servier is the big pharma firm that specializes in fighting high blood pressure.
Moving over to Mr. Macron to answer on the Servier accusations, first of all.
Well, I share some of the recommendations made by Mrs. LePen, but on the drugs, I've got to bad you. 80% of drugs are produced abroad. When you tax, if you want to tax imports, you're going to increase the prices of imported drugs. With Madame Le Pen, there will be a tax. We don't know if it's 3 or 10%, but so imports are going to be taxed.
So we've abandoned the idea of having French pharma firms.
We have some great French laboratories, but we're not going to do it. We're not going to cover overnight the imports that you will be banning. So in the years to come, if you are elected, all drugs will increase in price, all imported drugs, to show the incoherence of what you propose to the French. Next, the real problem...
It's not true.
You can check this in your files. As regards the rest, one of the real problems are the medical deserts, where there are many counties of France where there is a shortage of doctors and nurses. We must invest in medical centers, we must reorganize public medicine and private medicine to facilitate patients' experience so that they can get out of hospital more quickly, to go to medical centers, to have easier access to specialists, and in order to relieve the accident and emergency departments. And I'm particularly thinking of our territories overseas. There is a need to boost healthcare in Guyana in particular. Almost all our overseas territories have an inadequate healthcare offering and a lack of specialists. And we spend more money on evacuating patients from our overseas territories to metropolitan France, whereas we should encourage specialists to go to overseas territories.
It's a huge problem of illegal immigration in Guyana and Mayotte.
You're quite right. There is an immigration issue in those overseas territories, but there is a healthcare problem which I wish to underscore. If we want to reduce what remains to be paid by the patient on prostheses, for hearing aids, for dental aids, when I talk about glasses, I'm talking about both the frame and the lenses. We need to clarify the relationship between social security, the mutual insurance companies, companies and the professionals, the prosthetists and the doctors. The patients have to pay much too much today because we have standard contracts which cannot be modified. We must have 3 standard contracts for all citizens: a medium contract, an all-risk contract that covers everything, and a minimum contract. It's very difficult today. If you compare your insurance coverage contract with your neighbours, it's impossible to know if you have better coverage than your neighbour. We must all come around the table, and one of my priorities will be to reform health insurance. And prevention, I think, is very important. I fully agree that we must. It will take years to train doctors, and in order to catch up the shortage. We must improve prevention in schools, in healthcare, in nursing homes, and so on. In the training of doctors, they must have at least 1 quarter dedicated to prevention.
You've been speaking about prevention. It didn't bother you in the El Khomri law to see that vocational health is...
It's called the Macron law.
El Khomri.
It's not called the Macron law. It's called the El Khomri law.
Because you didn't want to assume it. It's the Macron law.
There is no Macron law.
It's the Macron El Khomri law, shall we say. In the Macron El Khomri law, we see clearly in that law that healthcare protection in companies has collapsed because we're withdrawing the means to do prevention for employees, that we've cut those resources, so we're cutting medical appointments. That's going to have a very serious consequence on prevention that you've discussed, but plainly, in actual fact, you don't plan to implement.
We can push forward. I would ask you to respond to a very specific question. At what age should the French people be able to retire?
60 with 40 annuities, 60 if they have 40 annuities, very clear. 60 years when they have 40. No. I commit to it being the case by the end of the 5-year term. No, it hasn't changed.
I thought you were going to do all this within 2 months of being elected.
2 months?
As soon as I'm elected, overnight, you're going to reform
No, Mr. Macron,
the system.
listen, but talk about your plans, but not mine, because you don't know what my project is. Let me tell you very clearly, the sooner the better. The sooner the better, because the idea that we should always ask sacrifices from French people by really blaming them, that's your great specialty objectively. I mean, if our pension system doesn't work, it's their fault. They're not working long enough. They're not working enough. There's always this business of blaming the French if they're unemployed. Mr. Macron, you say it's your fault. It's because you're not accepting the job offers put to you. That's why you want to, in fact, limit unemployment benefits by saying that 2 offers, we don't know where, what job, 200 kilometers away, 300 kilometers away. And if after 2 job offers they've said no, they've rejected them, no more unemployment benefit. Well, that way of blaming the French people, I can no longer hack it.
You are right.
No reason
You are
to
quite right.
have that blame.
But they have the right not to be taken for fools. Talk about your project.
Thank you. If the retirement system today is in great difficulty, it's not the fault of the French people, it's your fault, the system that's supporting you, that's been in power for years, put in place an economic model leading to mass unemployment, because in fact the only way and a good way of saving pensions is to create jobs. Retiring at 60 is 17 billion. Reducing unemployment is 25 billion extra income for the state. You weren't able to do that because this wild, rampant globalization, opening up of borders, competition of all against all, well, that leads to the mass unemployment that we're seeing today. We want to break with that model, put in place protection against globalization, to rearm in the face of globalization. globalization and thereby effectively with our economic fabric, small, medium-sized businesses return to the road of jobs, reduce unemployment, and to save this system, pension system that we're so attached to. You want a single scheme? It's been in the files of the ultra-liberals, this single scheme, because in fact it'll be across the board cutting, and of course it'll be the end of additional pensions. That is, of course, managers, the privates, will this point-based retirement system. We find it in Mr. Fillon. That's very similar when it comes to putting ultra-liberal measures in place, such as that one.
With your suggested reform, Mr. Macron, a globalization of the system, what would be the retirement age?
First of all, Mrs. Le Pen proposes that people should be allowed to retire at 60, and she had initially said that this will cost us 30 billion. It cannot be funded. What was done in the early 80s by François Mitterrand tried to do that at a time when life expectancy was 10 years lower than it is today. So ultimately, there is no magic. Retirement, pensions. I believe in the pay-as-you-go system, whereby those in actively working pay for those who are retired. So either you have to increase contributions or you have to reduce pensions. You cannot allow everybody to go to retire at 60, notably those who do not have physically demanding jobs, who work in offices. At 60, it's very generous. You can retire, but you don't explain how you finance all that. Of course, you take into account the cut in unemployment, but you don't explain how you will cut unemployment. You don't propose anything. So Madame Le Pen's retirement plan is either an increase in contributions or a cut in pension. Let's keep the system we have, but to make it fairer. Don't lie. I am not proposing a single system. I want the basis. We have 37 different basic pension schemes in this country. It's unacceptable. People don't accept this inequality. A retailer, a farmer, a craftsman no longer accepts to see other people with special pension regimes that are much more favorable.
Same age for everyone, you say?
So for the next mandate, I'm not going to change the level of social contributions. All those who I'm not going to change. I'm going to put in place a system which will gradually come into place. All acquired rights will be maintained, and each person will contribute a little bit more each year. And we will then decide in a responsible way, are you prepared either to increase contributions or to retire later? It will be decided.
It will be by the Employers' Federation.
No, it's not.
Madame Parizeau may well be your Prime Minister, in fact.
I have an announcement to make. No, it's not the plan of the Employers' Federation.
This maybe isn't the most interesting question.
It's a fascinating question to know who will be. Yeah. It's important to know.
Mrs. Le Pen,
For all we knew.
we are often accused of not going into
Prime Minister's very
detail on
important.
things, something that is of concern to the French people.
So the pay-as-you-go system is more transparent and fairer, and it is funded. We know how it is funded.
On security and terrorism, this is something that is of great concern to the French people. There have been numerous terrorist attacks. There are 2 laws that came into power. We are still under a state of emergency. What are your propositions given the current context? Mrs. Le Pen.
Security and terrorism is a major issue, totally absent from your project. Totally absent. No proposal whatsoever. The physical security of our fellow citizens, the fight against terrorism, fundamentalism, you don't want to lead it. No. Against terrorism, we have to restore our national borders immediately, right away. And that's something that I will do immediately after I assume power. We must immediately expel the foreigners on the watch list out of Islamic fundamentalism. All the dual nationals will implement the stripping of nationality. No, you're against that, but you're in favor of all lax proposals, those that display firmness.
Let me explain my own project.
Stripped of their nationality, they'll also be expelled.
You're going to terrorize people, stripping people of the nationality. This debate has already happened. The President of the Republic suggested it. It doesn't solve the problem. Somebody who is attacked by terrorists, these people are committing suicide. These are suicide bombers.
So you're just waiting for the attack.
Somebody who wants to commit suicide, stripping a person of nationality, will not prevent somebody from committing suicide.
So before they've committed the attack, stripping their nationality, expelled immediately. All those removed from France are policemen can continue to keep a watch on a limited number, because to leave people, 11,000 Islamic fundamentalists on the watch list, 11,000, that's the record of your government. That is shameful. The day after the attack, you said, and I'm not going to invent a program during the night against terrorism. You're running to be president, and you haven't even got a program made up, a serious, consistent program.
I'm not falling into the trap.
Be finished.
You're invecting, you're continually insulting, you're very irritated.
I'm running behind. Let me speak.
Talk about your project instead of saying stupid things about my project. I don't react to events like you.
Not only don't have a product, but you're complacent with Islamic fundamentalism. Because
Give your propositions, Mr. Le Pen. Mr. Macron will have the opportunity to answer you later.
Because you're interrupting me every 10 seconds I sense you're irritated. We must attack the root problem of evil, the exponential growth of Islamist fundamentalism on our soil. Of course, we must shut down the Salafist mosques, expel the preachers of hatred and the associations that support you, that IOEF, the Union of Islamic Organizations in France, Islamist organizations in France, because it's an Islamist organization that defends Islamist fundamentalism, supports Mr. Macron, invited to each of its congresses people who came to express their hatred of Jews, of homosexuals, of misbelievers, and systematically engage in hate speech. Mr. Ali Hamadan, who's again in favor of stoning women, supports you. No, it's important for the French people to know this.
Please talk about your project.
And when you were told, do you accept the support of OEF? You said, no problem. So all those that they received in their congresses and saying things that are really a call for murder don't seem to upset you. I think that's extremely revealing and extremely problematical. We must attack all these associations that are supported by Muslim Brotherhood, stop foreign funding from countries that Mr. Macron knows well, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, because back then you maintained tax breaks for investments by these countries. In France, and I believe your government granted a Republican accolade recently to one of its leaders. We must eradicate the ideology of Islamist fundamentalism in our country, and you won't do it because you're subjected to them, because they hold you. It's as simple as that. It's sad to say, it's terrifying, because it can have very onerous consequences, but we saw it with the Sao affair. Clearly, you were blackmailed. Either you kept Mr. Saud, who's an Islamist radical, or the OEF called for your defeat, and you prepared to keep that support rather than running the risk of expressing your express condemnation of these abuses that lead to deaths, that committed multiple attacks, and against which today nothing serious has in actual fact been done, because the laws for intelligence laws, for security...
These weren't voted for by your
and
MPs
quite
in Parliament, by the way.
It's all total waffle to keep an eye on everyone, not to have to keep an eye on those who are on the watch list who are dangerous. And over and beyond that, we're being soft on the legal front. And this daily insecurity today is an unbearable weight, not just in towns, but also in the countryside. And so there needs to be convictions. These convictions must be applied. We need to have 40,000 additional prison places. And to free up a number of places, we have to have bilateral agreements with countries that the foreigners come from that are imprisoned so that they serve their sentence in their country of origin. There's a plan with re-implementing intelligence system which is complete to fight against crime and terrorism. And of course, you'll have noticed both are today systematically linked. That's hybridization.
Mr. Macron, your answer.
Terrorism and the terrorist threat are the priorities for the next few years. I want to be the president of the French Republic, so I want to be head of the army and in charge of the security of France. That would be my priority. This implies reinforcing law enforcement forces before attacks take place. Regarding the watch list, this is intelligence. I want to strengthen the measures which have already been taken, including imprisonment or detention, or which are for activities which relate to jihadist activities. The watch list, if you meet a jihadist, you can be listed on this watch list. And there's only a quarter of terrorists since 2012. The priority.
You'd rather keep them?
He didn't interrupt you. Please don't interrupt him.
As I've always said, a quarter of the terrorists were on the watch list. So we have to improve intelligence. We have to strengthen and in some cases we have to expel people. And I'm in favor of more surgical interventions rather than general thing. I want to strengthen our intelligence. We have dismantled our domestic territorial intelligence service. The threat covers the whole of French territory, so we must focus on all parts of our territory, strengthening the links with cyber intelligence, and to coordinate all this, to prevent rather than cure. I would create a task force which would report directly to the President of the Republic and not another agency that will coordinate the intelligence services. And then closure of borders is not a solution. There are many countries which are not part of the Schengen Agreement which have had terrorist attacks in spite of closing their borders. So I have since November 2015, Schengen, we have restored border controls to fight against terrorism, and over 70,000 people have been arrested. So what you're proposing is powder in the eyes. It's so we have to identify all those people who are a threat, and there are people, our intelligence service. We have to cooperate also with other states. We need greater cooperation between member states of the European Union. There has been some progress. The passenger data control, we can have passenger information. We can now, terrorists fly. There are many terrorists. You voted against the passenger information system. There have been attacks in airports and more than on the borders.
You didn't prevent it.
You voted against all reforms by the European Union to fight against terrorism.
Zero. Pointless.
So you propose nothing. What are you going to put at the borders? More guards? Are you serious?
I'm very serious.
You think customs officers will be able to fight against terrorists?
Customs officers who will control our borders.
Customs officers are remarkable civil servants, but they're not trained to fight against terrorists. It's not their job.
They will arrest them.
Terrorists work on the internet. They use other means of action.
We do have a question on this topic.
Sorry, I have a question. Mr. Macron, you said France has a share of responsibility in the breeding ground of terrorism. Can you explain that?
First of all, I'm going to go against the stupid things you said earlier. I have a serious project which I have always taken my responsibilities, unlike Madame Le Pen, who is very good at talking about the fight against terrorism on the television set, but whenever there are reforms in the European Parliament, she doesn't vote in favor of them. The OIF, if this organization invites people or carries out activities which go against the law, I will have it banned. I don't know the leaders of this organization, and I have the party that got them to participate in meetings was the National Front, the Front National, with Mr. Alliot. I have had nothing to do with those people. I don't know those people at all.
Well, I'll tell you.
I have no relationships with them.
Well, they support you, and you said you accepted their support.
Either they don't respect the laws of the Republic, in that case, file a complaint, take them to court.
Okay.
If I'm elected President of the Republic, I will dismantle all associations.
Not yet.
I'm not President of the Republic. I can't do it.
You accept their support as a candidate.
Are they breaking the law? Are they breaking
Cynicism.
the law?
Right, yes.
You're cynical.
Ratil Nabulsi invited to the Northern UOIF Congress in 2016. Homosexuality leads to the destruction of homosexuals. That's why they need to be condemned to death.
It's wonderful to hear you defending homosexuals.
Another, the UIF in 2017, I'm not going back too far, described the Jews as usurers, the acme of felony in the L'Humanité newspaper. It's those people who support your accept, and you say, I'll wait until I'm president. I hope you'll never be president.
The wonderful merit of this debate is to listen to you expressing compassion for the Jews and the homosexuals of this country. It's wonderful. It's very, very... I've always protected them, of course. I've always protected
by supporting UIF, Islamist fundamentalism. I hope you're joking. Don't joke with that.
Don't lie, and I'm not joking. I don't support the IOF, and I repeat.
You accepted their support.
All associations which call for violence and hatred will be in trouble with my project.
You accepted the support of UIF. You accepted the support of UIF.
The IOF has participated in your meetings, not mine.
You said in a show, I accept the support of UIF. That's all, that's all. France has a share of responsibility.
Who came to a deal? Who came to a deal with Daesh? It was your people have signed
has a share of
agreements with
responsibility in the
Daesh
breeding
people.
ground of terrorism.
He will
What does that
have
mean?
the opportunity to answer that with our next question. What should we do with young radicals, homegrown radicals in France?
May I answer in a reasonable way? Because these are serious debates. We cannot only talk through insinuations. I'm not uncomfortable at all. Why are young French people radicalizing? These are the right
You
questions.
said it's because of France.
I didn't say that. Don't lie. Once again, I said we must ask ourselves, when young French people, when young French women born in France, who have grown up in France, who have been educated in our country, when they follow fanatics, and destroy our own children. We must ask ourselves questions. We have a share of responsibility for this. But the main cause are the jihadists, the terrorists. And that's why I want to wage a war
What's the share of
against Iraq and
responsibility?
Syria. May I answer? Because these are important questions. How can children born in the Republic can radicalize? There are some are mentally disturbed.
Psychiatric, that unbalanced.
Yes, we know there are some unbalanced people, mentally unbalanced people among the radical, those who have been radicalized. So we need to take preventative measures. Our republic must give every individual his or her place. At the same time, we must fight resolutely, have zero tolerance for terrorism outside our borders and within our borders, and make sure that every individual finds his place in our republic. But today, our republic does not give all young people a place in society through the failure at school, social and economic failure. So we have a share of responsibility. We must examine our own conscience when our own children want to destroy our own republic. And for me, this is the most important thing. As the head of the army, as head of security, I will be determined and I will fight in every way against Islamist terror. What they expect, the trap, is the trap you are going to fall into. Civil war. What the terrorists expect is that we should divide ourselves. They want to hear hate speech. And Mr. Keppel, a famous academic, said this morning, Abu Musad in 2005, in a text, said, our biggest wish is that Madame LePen should come to power in France. That would be wonderful for us jihadists, because they're seeking for radicalization, division, civil war. You are promoting civil war. Fighting against terrorists does not mean giving in to their trap, the trap of civil war. And that is the risk that you are running by insulting the French because of their religion, and by, I will never go down that road. Never.
Never, never in all my life have I insulted anyone because of his religion or background, but that's an old litany, young outside and old inside, because your arguments are twice your age. Don't go on that area. I'm defending France, and we'll find a point of connection. I defend France, whatever happens. Don't you think that you have a share of responsibility in the hatred that's growing in a number of young people in respect of France? When you go to Algeria, accusing France of crimes against humanity, that is the most serious crime that can exist. You who wants to be president, you went to Algeria, you went abroad to say France has committed a crime against humanity. But so how can you be surprised that a young number of people say that since France committed a crime against humanity against us, why don't we come and make it pay for its crime? Don't you think that you have a huge responsibility when you say such things about the hatred that a number of young people have towards the country that they live in, or some of the country of which they have the nationality?
What are you suggesting, Marine Le Pen, on the fight against the radicalization of young people?
It's very simple. Radicalization must be managed by the courts. Once again, we put an end to all the associations, sports, cultural, that have spread across our territory with the support of local elected representatives. We do the rounds.
So you will arrest them even if they have nothing to do with Islam. You will stop those associations even if they have nothing to do with Islam.
Okay, continuing to engage in electoralism, I'm talking about something that's very important, which is the growth of this fundamentalist ideology that recruits by preying on the weakness of our leaders, of the willful blindness of a number of elected representatives locally. We must put a stop to that. Huge number of sports associations where there are religious grievances that are unacceptable, and everyone turns a blind eye in companies, and it's somewhat thanks to you, or because of you, should I say, Mr. Macron, because with the El Khomri law, as it happens, well, you prevent business leaders from avoiding community-based grievances and religious requirements within companies. So all those that backtracking, betrayals, those little reasonable adjustments, but totally unreasonable, I would say, with this radical Islam, well, we're paying the price for that. We're paying a heavy price for that. So it's with total firmness that we need to act. And objectively, when I hear Mr. Macron go to Algeria saying France has committed a crime against humanity, that he accepts the support of UOIF, this Islamist organization that receives preachers of hatred, Mr. Ali Ramadan justifying the stoning.
You're saying stupid things, as usual. Mr. Ramadan, I don't know him.
All those watching
You are saying very
will
stupid
know.
things. You're lying.
Absolutely not. Go and see. We have the screenshot. Maybe you asked him to remove his tweet, but that support was given. Nothing, no word from you to condemn that. I'm saying that there's very strong concern to see you elected at the head of state.
But the lies that you cultivate nourish the divisions in our country on this issue. You raised an important question, that of the Algerian war. It was dramatic. Many of our fellow citizens were affected by the Harkis, the French who were repatriated.
You treated as criminals. You call them criminals.
I met all of them, and those who the Algerian war divides our country. I want to go to look towards the future. I don't want to wage the war of memories.
You reopen those wounds.
I'm not repenting and I'm not denying. There were crimes against humanity that were committed. You insulted a lot of French people when you discussed what happened during World War II when the French police rounded up the Jews in the Vel d'Hiv. French police officers rounded up the Jews in Paris. And that is a crime against humanity. We have to look at our past directly. We must tell the truth to all our fellow citizens, to reconcile them in order and not to cultivate hatred, as your extreme right party has been doing so for 10 decades, and you have done
Mr. Macron, we're not going to have a legal debate on the Vel d'Hiv roundup here, but I consider that France was in London. That's my opinion, that General de Gaulle had, that Mr. Mitterrand had, that today Mr. Chevènement has today.
Leave General de Gaulle out of this.
That Mr. Chevènement, Mr. Guénaud, a whole set of people who consider that France wasn't guilty of that terrible horror, but in fact it was the Vichy regime that was
false. That's not true. Jacques Chirac recognized the responsibility of the French state.
Jacques Chirac, I mean, we don't have to share his view. Many have a legal vision that's different on the matter, and everything that lightens the responsibility of the Vichy regime is, in my view, unwelcome. So once again, to make that utilization.
You tried to use that. You opened that topic.
It's
you opened
pretty
up that
revealing of what you've been doing for a week now.
And it certainly hurt all our fellow citizens who are Jews.
But that utilization, it speaks volumes about you.
You talked
a
about
journalist
it.
who put the question.
It's a journalist that you probably didn't choose, but you
I
let him
don't
ask
choose
you
many
questions freely.
journalists. You can choose them, but not I.
Marine Le Pen, Emmanuel Macron, on va avancer.
Marine Le Pen and Emmanuel Macron, let's move on to security in a broader sense. You're both saying the same things about zero tolerance. What is zero tolerance to you, Marine Le Pen?
Well, zero tolerance is that every time a crime or an offence is committed, there needs to be a sanction that applies. A penalty must apply. With the Toubirois laws in large part today, well, sentences can be replaced. I mean, number of measures, the bracelet, to have to go see the judge from time to time. Maybe we can talk about the consequences of that lax situation. Mr. Serfi, the attack who killed Xavier Jugelet. Mr. Serfi had broken his legal control. He was seen by a judge, and he said, well, that's not nice, you mustn't violate that, and he was freed by the judge. That situation's unacceptable. So I think that every time an offence is committed, even if it offence that is an incivility, there needs to be a criminal sanction, but the judges must be involved. They must receive instructions regarding the scrapping of a return to minimum sentences, for example, or that foreigners who are sentenced must be returned to their country. The dual sentence has been scrapped, so we have to accept on our soil those who leave prison and who are foreign nationals remain in France. I mean, these are things which obviously are unacceptable. For that, we need more judges. I'm very sorry there. Again, that's more spending, but I assume that. More judges, more registrars, and more prison places, because today we're in a situation not only of overcrowding in the prisons, but a huge number of criminals and offenders don't go to prison, whereas they're sentenced to firm sentences.
Macron, what is zero tolerance for you?
First of all, 10,000 extra gendarmes and police officers across France. We need to increase the resources of our police forces and gendarmes. The riot police were attacked by extreme left militants and who were seriously burnt. We need to equip our law enforcement organizations better. The day-to-day security needs to be reinforced, and I totally assume this investment. In the field, on the ground, I want zero tolerance against for delinquency. Our fellow citizens see every day minor offences which are not brought to justice. So I want to improve day-to-day policing by policemen who know the ground, know the field, and I will give them two powers, extra powers that don't exist, which I'm in my view, I'll decide. First of all, the power to impose fines for minor offences for which there are no criminal, which are not criminal. For example, shoplifting, shoplifting. I want police officers to be able to impose fines, as they can already do for truck drivers, for example. A gendarme or a police officer can impose a fine for shoplifting, for example, as we already do for road offences.
Go and collect the fine, because in other places where the fire brigade don't go in, or do you think bailiffs are going to go in order to collect the fine that's been imposed?
How do we handle that for road traffic?
Okay, but for road
fines?
offences. Road traffic offences affect the honest citizens who indeed fleeced, who forced to pay, whereas the thugs who live in other areas, their fines are not collected. That's the big injustice that exists in our countries. There are milk cows that are really the drivers, and others in estates under the responsibility of thugs. They can commit all possible crimes crimes and offences, and the sentence is never applied when it's just a fine or even to repair the damage that they've committed.
So, after diverging and interrupting me, you said something which is totally irrelevant to what I was saying. It will be possible for police officers to impose fines. What is unbearable for a policeman who stops a young person who holds drugs or is shoplifting? He's taken to a magistrate after a long procedure, and then he's out in the field again, and you won't solve this problem overnight. And then 6 months, a year later, the offender is called back, and in 3/4 of cases, the case is dismissed. So I want the police and the gendarmes to be able to impose fines, and if the fines aren't paid, then judicial action can be taken. When young people or gangs which create trouble near the station at the foot of towers who have been identified, and our law enforcement organization must be able, with the authorization of a magistrate, with an accelerated procedure, they must be banned from staying in certain places.
Well, hang on, Mr. Macron. I mean, that's absolute rubbish. It's a civil injunction. It's a sentence, so it can only be applied by a judge.
I am proposing an accelerated procedure.
I'm very sorry, it's important.
There are many other important topics we need to get
I'll
to.
let you finish your proposals, on secretary. Let me finish my proposals very
quickly,
briefly.
please.
So in addition to day-to-day policing and more, the police need new means of coercion. I want our justice system to be more determined. So all sentences must be executed. And so you are going to cancel the Taubira law.
Madame Taubira was wrong.
So going back on the Taubira law,
Just a question.
if you could wrap up, but not with a
Yes, he
question,
will.
please, because you won't be able to answer and we won't be able to get to Europe.
Take a minute. Policemen are systematically attacked, burned. We try and murder them, as we saw yesterday.
I've just talked about that myself.
That's why I'm coming back on this. So these are groups, the Antifa groups that break things up. Do you want them to be dissolved?
I'm for the dissolution of all violent groups that have been identified.
Why wasn't it done?
Emmanuel Macron, let's not
Socialist
go
Party.
back over this again.
There's a big difference. You are the heiress of a system, a party, and a name. I'm not. I participated in the government for a very short period. I resigned from the government and the civil service. So you can continually blame me for everything that has been done over the last 5, 10, or 15 years. I am only accountable for what I have done personally.
You're the heir of François Hollande, who supports you twice a day, as well as all your minister friends with whom you've governed. All the socialist ministers who were your colleagues in government. Why
Let's not go back to the
Why
beginning
don't
of
you
the debate.
accept this legacy? We now call you Hollande Junior. Your nickname, Hollande Junior.
I'm sure everyone tuned in from the very beginning. We don't need to go all the way back to the beginning.
I assume my
We want to move
choices.
on to the international sphere and to Europe. Please stop.
They won't believe you.
Madame Le Pen, the
Come on.
French are not as stupid as you seem to think they are.
Well, because the
Don't
French
say
people are
you've
smart, let's
broken
get on
with
to
Mr.
smarter
Hollande.
topics.
No, you left in order to organize your candidacy, that of the system to put in place the conditions to make the French people think that precisely
If you
you were
please.
new. Whereas
Let's
in
move on
fact
to
you're the
Europe.
candidate chosen by the socialists and by the system to survive. survive. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to survive.
Yet there are 30 seconds between you. Let's move on to Europe. With Christophe, we're going to talk about the international sphere, as I believe this is an important point of contention between you two. Yes, we're moving on to the international sphere. There are differences between your two positions, starting off, of course, with the European Union. You have two completely opposite views on the European Union. Could you give each your vision for the Europe of tomorrow? Marine Le
Of
Pen.
course. The European Union will leave the sovereign free alliance, that is the prime initial vision of Europe, where the various European people would retain their sovereignty, that is the freedom to decide for themselves, controlling their borders, deciding who comes in and who doesn't on their territory, will control their currency, to adapt their currency to their economy in order to avoid ending up with the situation that we know of mass unemployment and loss of competitiveness that Mr. Macron is trying to resolve by either cutting wages or defending an unemployment benefit system of social protection, or where the representatives of the French people, as part of democracy, will pass laws. They will have an authority above the directives that are imposed by commissioners of no one knows their name or their face, and no one has ever chosen, above all, and will regain economic sovereignty, economic patriotism, to give a boost to our French companies, intelligent protectionism, to put in place the locks that are necessary so that production doesn't compete with us through health dumping, social dumping, or environmental dumping. And of course, we'll have a control over our trade policy. I know that you're for CETA, for TAFTA, in fact, for free trade agreements that are imposed upon us and are not decided by us, that have serious consequences for farming, for our breeders, but also our industry, and also serious consequences in terms of health, because production that reach our market obviously are not subject to the same safety standards as those that apply to our own farmers, and obviously aimed at protecting the health of our fellow citizens. So I want to enter into negotiations in order to bring about this European alliance, to organize a conference of heads of state and governments rather similar to the Messina conference, to hold a constitutional referendum that I'd, of course, put to the vote of French people.
Do you know when for the referendum?
Constitutional referendum in September, specifically in September, where I'll indicate that every new law will have a superior authority above the European directives in terms of European precedent. In parallel, I'll put in place all measures that I can put in place immediately on the economic front, reducing costs, tax increase, boosting small pensions, etc., because not everything depends on the EU, but key things are blocking us, preventing us from relaunching our economy. There's also the possibility, the Luxembourg Compromise, to go against European rules when vital interests of the country are at stake. I mean, I believe that's something that we need to be put in place in order to immediately put an end to the Posted Workers Directive immediately, because it has serious consequences on jobs, and we must immediately take that decision. And let me end at last, after these negotiations, because I'll do nothing against the French people. I won't do what your socialist friends did in 2005. That is, the French voted no to the Constitution, and in spite of that, we said yes in their place. I'll turn to the French and I'll present the outcome negotiation. This is what I managed to obtain. Do you consider it's enough? Do you consider that it's not enough? And on that choice that will commit us for the future, crucial for the future of France. I'm a European. I want to save Europe, to wrench Europe from the hands of the EU that's killing it. I'll seek the views of the French people.
When would this second referendum be?
I said 6 months. That's an indication. That's an indicative timetable. I mean, I don't want to create chaos. I don't want to rush things. I mean, 6, 10 months, it'll be 10 months. What's important, once again, is to obtain this negotiation. And why? And just for a few more seconds, Mr. Macron, you gave an interview a while back to Reuters. I think it was on the 2nd of March, where you said the euro is going to be dead within 10 years. That's it, dead 10 years. I don't know.
Non, mais en gros. Non, mais parce que vous dites toujours en gros quand vous me citez. C'est jamais précis.
You're not very precise. I said more or less 10 years.
You say if we don't have a federal Europe totally, with governments, with the loss of our sovereignty, totally with all keys of France, you give in all areas the budget, European tax, and the euro won't be able to survive. That's your solution. It's not mine. I don't think it's out of the French people to have this leap forward of federalism, almost a form of European extremism, because all the candidates of the first round, I'm very sorry, you were the one who was expressing the most radical position, the most extremist of being subjected to European federalism.
Maybe we could give the opportunity to Mr. Macron to give us his vision for the future of Europe.
The euro is important. It's the currency. It's not just a foreign policy. It's not just an abstract subject. It's what we use to pay. Do we leave the euro or do we stay in the euro?
We must return to our national currency. It's key. It's essential.
So you propose to leave the euro and return to the French franc?
Renegotiate. That we can free ourselves from the euro and we transform it into a common currency. That's what it was before it became the currency of France. Let's be clear. No, we won't.
Will we pay with the euro?
The central banks will pay with euros if they wish. Large companies will pay with the euro if they want. You know that full well.
So there will be two currencies.
Not for the French people, not for individuals, not for small companies, and you know that full well.
What will be the purpose of the euro? What will be the use of the euro?
It's a common currency. It's a basket of currencies. You know that. It existed because it existed. Just before the euro became our currency, our physical currency in France. Oh, yes. It was the euro already. And before that, it was the ECU, the ECU.
So the large companies paid in ECUs?
From 1993 to 2002, all large companies could pay in euros. That system worked perfectly. Mr. Macron, don't pretend you don't know that. You know full well it worked as part of the EMS, and it worked pretty well. But what the French people need to understand above all is that, well, I mean, this common euro currency doesn't really concern them. It's just a facility between states for central banks, but it doesn't affect them. They will have a currency. Please stop interrupting me. Yes, I'm speaking a lot, but you'll be able to catch up. So the French will have a currency in their wallet to return to a level appropriate to our level of economy, to export once again, and to once again gain market share. It had a very major impact on the purchasing power of the French people, because its introduction led to a spectacular increase in prices.
Thank you, Mrs. Le Pen.
Will the large companies pay in euros or in another currency?
They can choose. They have a choice.
Emmanuel Macron, we really need you to give us your vision for the future of Europe. She's partially answered that question. What is Europe going forward?
My Europe is the opposite of what Madame Le Pen is. A large company will not be able to pay in euros on the one hand and pay its employees in France in another currency. This has never existed. The ECU was a reference currency. Nobody used the ECU to pay. Our debts will be paid in euro. Will our debts be paid in euros or in francs? It's essential. It's
The project fear is coming back, the one that you developed at the time of the Brexit. That makes me laugh. Makes the French people laugh. Because before breakfast, there was Project Fear. It's going to be the collapse of the UK economy. The UK economy's never been in such great shape since the British decided to regain their freedom versus the... It doesn't work. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. Try something else.
The UK has never been part of the euro.
The Project Fear is still the same. Use the same arguments said to the British. If ever you vote to leave the EU, not to mention the currency, if ever you leave the EU, it'll be terrible. Your economy will collapse, recession, rocketing unemployment. The opposite happened. So the project that's implemented by the financial powers that support you, aimed at leaving the system as it is, because it's to their benefit in actual fact. The euro is the currency of the bankers, and it's not the currency of the people. That's why we must wrench ourselves from the currency. I know the whole system will defend it, Mr. Macron, because they have a benefit in it.
What is Europe in 2020, in your opinion?
I'm against everything Madame Le Pen has just said, to begin with. Can we have a democratic debate, Madame Le Pen, please? First of all, the big fear which you are manipulating the fears of our citizens regarding terrorism, etc. The great fear. And the UK has nothing to do with the euro. It has never been part of the euro. Now, the euro, you propose that France should withdraw from the euro. I think that's a mortal proposal and a dangerous proposal. And your do-it-yourself system with Mr. Dupont-Aignan, well, has no meaning. It shows that you are unprepared. What is your vision? My vision is to build a powerful Europe, to have a European policy that will be powerful and in which we will defend the interests of France. Everybody needs to understand. The farmer in the Cantal region buys his raw materials from abroad. He has to pay in euros, and you have to pay his employees in francs.
Buys products
a lot
abroad.
of products are imported, and if he's a stock breeder, the Italians will buy his products in euros, and he will pay his employees in francs.
Each country will have its currency.
So you're going to decide for the others. You've decided for the others.
That's the purpose of the negotiation.
So you are going to decide for the 19 other states that are part of the euro that they will leave.
Especially for those who are suffering and want their national currency. They're dying from the euro.
All of this will not exist. The farmer in the Cantal understands that he's part. The farmer who grows apples and who sells in euros, he needs the euro as a common currency. He will no longer have it. The saver who is listening to us, the day you leave the euro, how do you finance this program? You devalue the new franc by 20 or 30%. The saver overnight will lose 20 or 30% of his savings, will lose value, will drop in value by 20 or 30%. We are part of the Eurozone, whether we like it or not. It's the reality of the French economy.
You're economy minister and you're saying that. Okay. It's pretty worrying. Don't worry, French people understand why the results were so poor. It's incredible.
Marine Le Pen, you had your time to speak.
Your mobile phone, your files are made in countries that are abroad, and even what is made in France needs the rest of Europe. When those who are listening to us in Toulouse, Saint-Nazaire, or many other parts of France work on the A380 Airbus project, Airbus and its subcontractors, 1/3 of the value of the Airbus A380 is created in other European countries, because we are integrated. We live in an integrated economy, because the Germans will be keeping the euro. We will be in francs. we will lose our competitiveness.
No, we will
our
gain
competitiveness will
competitiveness.
diminish.
Because the mark will appreciate in value, and it's Germany that will
Madame
suffer a
LePen,
lot.
I courteously let you argument and give details. So now I would like you to let me present my point of view. France is not a closed country. It's a country that is part of Europe and part of the world. It's not the defeatism that you defend. I am for a strong France in a protective Europe, but I don't want our fellow citizens to lose purchasing power, jobs, competitiveness by our leaving the Eurozone.
Since when does it protect?
I courteously listen to you. Please courteously listen to me. Your project is mortal in terms of purchasing power, in terms of competitiveness, and in terms of our ability to be strong in the world. What I want a France that takes its responsibility, that implements reforms in terms of vocational training and unemployment. Many countries are doing very well in the Euro.
Germany.
Many other countries.
Germany.
Because they have implemented the reforms. And there are some countries that are not doing well outside Europe. What you propose is the currency war. The currency war has never helped us, has never
We had far fewer jobless than today.
In the 1990s.
In the year 2000, we didn't have fewer jobless.
We had
More jobless than today.
unemployed people. Reforms were not implemented as they should have at the beginning of the
So
turn
in
of the
2000,
century.
more unemployed than today. Okay. You were economy minister, right? Not I. I mean, I know nothing about that, but you were economy minister. So you probably know better than I do.
Fortunately, what you propose,
There are net users who can check if there were more unemployed in 2000 than today.
in the early 1990s, during the currency war, I am precise. In the early 1990s, when there was a real currency war and France hadn't started to converge economically with Germany, there were more unemployed people than today. France was not in a better state. So I want a competitive France and to remain in the euro, because the euro protects us. It prevents currency destabilization. It protects the savings of our fellow citizens. I don't want everybody to panic because we will have to introduce capital controls. As you said, I don't want, there will be a panic, a bank panic. I want from the very beginning in Europe to change the posted workers directive. As a minister, I introduced a card that controlled workers in the construction sector to fight against illegal posted workers. For the same job in the same country, people should be paid in the same way. The posted workers directive needs to be revised.
It's the charges that aren't the same.
Including charges.
You're going to impose that, I want, in a negotiation? I thought it wasn't possible.
Negotiations are possible. I fought against Chinese dumping. I'm not just words, a man of words, and I'm not proposing miraculous solutions. What I propose is clear, coherent, is to have a Europe that provides more protection with European markets that are reserved for at least 50% for European companies, a strong euro with more European investments, because we need European investments to have real control over posted workers. We have better control over posted workers. And finally, to have a trade policy that is more protective. We need a European trade policy, because that's what protects us in the face of Russia and China and other big countries. Today, we have a market of 60 million inhabitants. China has a domestic market of over 1 billion consumers. At the European level, in steel, The employees in the steel sector know this. We have been able to prevent Chinese attacks on our steel industry. I want Europe that goes faster, less bureaucratic and protect. But we need Europe in the context of globalization.
For 25 years, you've been promising social Europe.
I haven't been in power for 25 years.
The mass deindustrialization. We've seen the collapse of our jobs and massive offshoring.
Because the reforms were not fully implemented. It's not the fault of the euro.
The savings of the French peoples is under threat because of Europe. It's very important. The listeners must understand, if the strategist state isn't there to put its foot down, to prevent the banks from delving into the savings of savers. That's what they did in Cyprus. If it's not I representing the state says, no, I'll protect French savings at whatever price, whatever the fight, the battle I have to wage with the EU, then the French people will have their savings stolen. So it's submission to the EU.
It's completely false. In Cyprus and in Athens, the threat was the threat of leaving the euro. The problem, why did the Greeks and the Cypriots fight to stay in the euro?
The reality, you went to see Mrs. Merkel, you went to ask for her blessing because you plan to do nothing without her agreement. It's so true. What are you going to do opposite Mrs. Merkel? You said, I won't be opposite her, I will be with her.
Of course, I want France to measure up to Germany.
Let me tell you what happened. France will be led by a woman. It'll be either me or Mrs. Merkel. That's the truth.
Stop all these formulas. Germany has a visionary leader.
Let me finish. I know you're irritated.
Stop interrupting me. General de Gaulle and Chancellor Adenauer worked together, and
he didn't want that Europe.
They built the Europe that we have today.
There are other topics we can get to.
I come from a region that suffered from the war. I don't want the nationalism that you represent.
You had to include that.
You can laugh. You can laugh.
I was wondering when you were going to bring that one out.
Isolationism, nationalism, those are the pillars of your project. It's the fight against other people. For centuries, families have suffered from that policy.
You're mistaken in your historical. You're not
propose.
interested in the history of France or French culture. Not interested.
We don't have the same vision, Madame Le Pen, of French culture. What you propose is to leave history, and I hope our fellow citizens have understood that.
It's the imbalance between France and Germany that are the seeds of war. When there's a balance, when each defends their interests, when we're not subservient to the dictates of Europe. Think of Germany. War was created by this submission that you're replicated because your submission to Germany, and it's very serious.
You both had plenty of time to speak.
It concerns our sovereignty, our independence, but also defending the interests of the French people.
We completely understand that.
We fully agree, madam.
We will agree to disagree.
Our views, our visions are irreconcilable.
We need to push forward.
The German Chancellor will be pleased.
Insulting Germany is not good.
I understand their interests. They're defending their interests. You're defending their interests.
It is in the interest of the people watching that we move on.
The interests of France are not in conflict with Germany. Our real competition is with China, emerging countries.
Let's broaden the scope. People often say that foreign policy isn't that important, but we'd like your important, as this is one of the prerogatives of a head of state, we'd like your opinion on how we should interact with Mr. Trump and with Mr. Putin. Mr. Macron, you have 1 minute and 20 seconds behind Mrs. Le Pen.
My policy for France, which I would describe as a mixture of Gaullism and Mitterrandism. I want a strong France that implements reforms, that is credible and strong in Europe. Our world is more and more destabilized. It is destabilized economically, it is destabilized in terms of international security because terrorism comes from beyond our borders as well as within our borders, in Libya, in the Sahel, in Africa, and because the world is destabilized by the reconfiguration of alliances. I want France, a country that wants to know how to build peace. My priority will be the fight against Islamist terrorism by continuing to cultivate our alliances. I will propose to Mr. Trump to continue to work with the United States of America. They are our partners for intelligence, in terms of intelligence. They are our partners in the Security Council of the United Nations. We need the United States of America, and we should continue this work. Since World War II, and even before that, we were in the same camp. We had an independent voice, and when France refused to get involved in the war in Iraq, for example, we need strong cooperation for our security. With Mr. Trump, I want to continue the work that has started on climate change. We need,
He doesn't seem to agree with you.
Civil society doesn't agree with him, and Mr. Trump will soon realize that it's not in his interest. So I will propose to Mr. Trump to work together, and from an economic standpoint, I want stronger Europe. If you want to be credible in the face of the United States of America, we need an integrated, strong European market to protect it. That is the meaning of the reforms I favor, a real European policy market with public procurement rules. Mr. Putin has put several issues on the table. The Ukrainian conflict, we must de-escalate, we must favor de-escalation of this conflict, and the conflict in Syria. Russia is part of the solution, but I will not accept to have my behavior dictated by Mr. Putin, and that's the difference with Mrs. Le Pen. We will not submit to Russia or Mr. Putin's values, which are not the same values as ours. So regarding Syria, our priority must be the fight against terrorist jihadism, and we must find a political solution, a negotiated political solution, by getting all the stakeholders around the table. So the U.S. will be a working partner on a number of regional issues, which I will discuss with them. We don't have the same priorities and the same values.
Mrs. Le Pen, on Trump and Putin.
Well, it's very interesting what you said, Mr. Macron, because in fact we see the full difference there is between your vision and mine. You mentioned France by saying France will be respected if it's a large economic power, charts, budget. No, France will be respected if it's France, if it once again genuinely becomes France with this particular specific voice that it had in the world, because the world is waiting on France, and France has lost that special voice because it's subservient to Germany, to US policy. It must therefore regain its independence. I'm very sorry to have to remind you what General de Gaulle had imposed on numerous occasions: the independence of the voice of France in the world. In order to secure its independence, it must not subject itself to the imperialist vision of people, because that creates war. That creates war. The contrary of imperialism is the fact of respecting all nations. I believe France should once again be the state that respects all nations, respects their identity, of their culture, respectful of their system of political organization. The moralization, the moralizing, moral lessons, great specialty of the Socialist Party. You lecture the whole world. Not the whole world, that's the problem. It's always double standards. There are those that you lecture about morals and those who are your allies.
You're answering the same question as Mr. Putin.
Qatar, Saudi Arabia, for example, there you don't lecture them about morals.
On this subject,
Don't interrupt.
I'm interrupting you
Calm
because you're
down.
saying stupid things.
Hear me through, be courteous.
Qatar, Saudi Arabia are part of. I propose
Investment banker, journalist.
No,
I
that's our job.
propose that we get rid of the tax agreements with
Why
those
didn't you
countries.
do it when you were
I wasn't
minister?
responsible for
Let's
their
not go back
signing.
over Qatar. Your relationship with Vladimir Putin.
If I can just get a word in. You better? Feeling better?
When- I'm fine, thank you, Mrs. Le Pen.
I think we need to be equidistant between Russia and the United States. No reason to wage Cold War on Russia. Every reason to have relations with Russia, diplomatic, trade, strategic with Russia, because it's a great nation. Russia hasn't shown any hostility towards France. I don't care about what the relations between the US and Russia are. I hope that they'll be the best in the world. And I can tell you that in this world that is changing, Mr. Macron, that is making decisions that are opposite to those of your own, defending their independence, a form of intelligent protectionism, turning their back on systematic interference. I'm the best place to talk to that world, best place to speak to the India of Modi, Russia of Putin, the United States of Trump, talk to the UK of Theresa May. And you said very nice things about the United States and Russia. In fact, you rowed with everyone and lectured everyone. That's not the way to conduct diplomacy, to be heard in the world if we don't regain our diplomatic place, which is the voice of independence, of sovereignty, the voice of the defense of people, then France won't make its great return in the world and will continue to be viewed as Mrs. Merkel has viewed us for years.
We're going to move on to a different topic.
The world, if you're elected, the world won't look at us in the same way.
The great nations, India, Russia, the United States.
Read the international press. Read what they say about the image that you give of France. You do not give a good image of France.
We will see that on the 8th.
All the great nations follow my line, have turned their backs on the theories of ultra-liberalism, outright free trade. You want to
Both
sweep
of you
that
wanted
aside? You have
clear
your
debate.
old economic models of the 80s when there was Reagan, Mrs. Thatcher. Very sorry. No one admires that old economic model apart from you.
Do you want to move on to schools? Emmanuel Macron,
The French people will
Mrs. Le
decide.
Pen. Let's move on to a new topic.
You're so arrogant, you've already celebrated your victory at La Rotonde before the end of the second round.
The French people are watching us this evening, and they want to know what is your project for schools. My questions are concise, and I hope your responses will be just as concise. Mr. Macron.
My project for the school system is to focus our resources on primary school. 20% of primary school children don't know how to read and count. They will fail in the secondary schools, and 150,000 young people will be leaving the secondary school system without any qualifications. So we must focus on the primary schools in several ways. First of all, by restoring the hours of teaching, notably of the French language, and also it's reintroducing the teaching of Latin in secondary school, and practical work in modest families. Inequalities are reproduced when people go home. So tutorials are very important, and priority education zones. I want to reduce the number of pupils in primary school classes. That's where you learn the fundamentals. 12 pupils per class. 12,000 teaching positions will be created. So this is indispensable. And then we must make an effort in the terms of professional advice or orientation. We must get companies involved, and academic institutions must be more involved to explain what jobs are available. People from modest social origins whose parents have not been successful socially, they have a diploma, a school-leaving certificate or the baccalaureate, but they don't know what to do after leaving school. So at university, I want more transparency regarding the results of academic institutions. When you qualify in a university institution, what jobs can you get with a university diploma? And finally, I want to develop apprenticeships. Many young people will not succeed only through academic education. Apprenticeship is indispensable. We must simplify the rules. We must build bridges with the world of business and the corporate world. And in brief, those are my ideas. For me, the top priority for reconstructing our country is to transform the education system, and notably the primary schools.
Mrs. LePen.
School has been ransacked by the socialists, ransacked. Did just about everything and nothing. Instead of teaching French, reserved 50% in primary school to the French language because it's the heart of everything, and more generally to the fundamental skills we put in place, teaching and learning for children of their language of origin, reduce the teaching of grammar, scrapped repeating classes for budgetary reasons, not for the well-being of kids, but just for savings. We asked pupils to build their knowledge and skill sets, whatever that meant. There was no authority by teachers, so we must return to a school that transmits and with discipline, that is, return once again of the necessary authority of the teacher and respect for the teacher. We must, of course, enhance vocational teaching, because there again, a number of people felt that we wanted to produce intellectuals.
So you want to end up the single college system?
This selective sorting of vocational networks supports you too. A lot of socialists,
a lot of people,
a lot of ministers, a lot of socialists. I'd like to know how many you're going to have in your government.
So do you want to get rid of the unique college system, single college system?
And so this vocational process must be expanded and enhanced, because for years and years now, we let our youngsters think that 5 years after university they'll have a job, whereas increasingly it's not the case. I want university, the criteria be based on merit and not just lottery draws. The socialists have just decided it's incredibly unfair. In fact, selection today is done either through failure or just by a lottery system. It must be merit-based, and in passing in university, I want secularism to apply. I think you're in favor of the veil in university. I'm strongly opposed to the veil in the university, and I'm opposed to all visible signs in the company and in universities. Secularism must apply everywhere, of course, in schools, with the neutrality but also in all public areas and spaces. Today, the lower the level of teaching, the more there is a selection through money and through birth. And it's family, it's networks and money, and that's contrary to the Republican ideal.
Let's move on. We don't want to cut you off. But both of you expressed your desire that this debate doesn't go on for 4 hours. You wanted a 2 to 2.5 hour debate. So a simple question on institutions and the functionings of the French Republic. Do you believe we should reduce the number of MPs? And what do you believe on people holding multiple elected positions at once? Mr. Macron, you are slightly behind in the time, so a brief response so we can touch on other things.
Yes, I am in favour of reducing the number of parliamentarians by 1/3 in both the National Assembly and the Senate, and I intend to implement the reform very quickly, very early in my term of office, and I don't exclude a recourse to the referendum if the assemblies don't agree.
A referendum.
So I want to reduce by 1/3 the number of parliamentarians. I want to introduce a dose of proportional representation for elections, including parliamentary elections. It will not be possible for the elections in June, but for the next elections beyond June, proportional representation will better represent the public opinion. I am in favor of the law that reduces multiple elected positions at the same time, and I think we should limit parliamentarians to 3 mandates.
You're going to apply to those you're about to invest? There's multiple offices?
We're even going to do something that will embarrass you a lot. Not only will there be half of the candidates will be new, but none of them will have a criminal record.
We've applied it for 20 years. You think you've invented sliced bread?
I'm not a representative of the scandal party. It's your party.
The business party is mine.
Scandal party.
Be careful what you say. I hope we'll learn nothing in the coming days and weeks. You can lecture us.
A lot of your friends have been trying to look for things.
Can I speak? No one understood the explanations you gave regarding your assets.
The tax office, the taxes have understood perfectly well.
The president, a high authority, a friend of Mr. Hollande, called for a vote in favor of him in 2012. There's a petition doing the rounds. A university professor asking you for clarification on 15 points. How you were able to spend 1 minimum wage a day.
The difference between you and me, you are under a judicial procedure. The high authority which examined my file said there was no problem.
Helped by the friends
it's an
of Mr.
independent institution.
Independent.
You are calling it when the judges don't find in your way, in your favor, you say they are dishonest. Our judicial system must be respected.
We won't learn that you have an offshore bank account in Bahamas. I hope.
We know that you underestimate your assets, and you are currently going through a criminal procedure. I'm not being pursued by the justice system. So there's one thing that differentiates us. Tomorrow, one of us will have to guarantee our institutions. We all aspire to that. You have threatened civil servants. You permanently say, criticize magistrates and judges when they don't find in your favor. You are unworthy of being the guarantor of our institution because you're a threat for our institution, and that's your problem.
Mr. Macron, your problem is that you're in a permanent conflict of interest, and I will be the best guarantor of institutions. I know them well. I was a lawyer for a number of years, and I know how the justice system works, and I know how, from time to time, civil servants are asked for things that are not admissible. They're sometimes compelled to do that. It's unfortunate. I want to protect them from the influence of political power on their independence, on the way they respect the law. So I know very well what happens and how it happens. One day I'll explain to you. Come and see me. I'll tell you exactly how it works. I'm in
Don't be
favor
arrogant,
of the
Mrs. Le Pen.
referendum.
I won't go and seek your advice for any reason. Our fellow citizens will not do so either.
He is 2 minutes behind you.
You have shown, yet again, that you're unworthy by insinuating that our magistrates, our judges, are not independent. I regret. France deserves better than you.
Our judges are totally independent. The judges of the Judiciary Union who pin political leaders and victims on a wall of
I'm not talking about a trade union.
They're not politicized. Some are politicized. That situation's unacceptable, but it suits you because they're politicized on your side, and that's unfortunate.
Don't add your unworthiness to the unworthiness of our institutions.
Subject
I am
yourself.
not subservient to anybody.
You're romping before Germany, before the judiciary, the UIF, communities, the powers of money, the banks, romping.
I am standing and to be standing. I don't need to dirty other people. You are permanently slandering foreigners, judges, magistrates. You are slandering everybody. Our country doesn't need slander. We need effectiveness, efficiency, and peacefulness.
You mean the workers of GAD you qualified as illiterate, those you bought your suits from, the workers that you said were alcoholics, that you treated as criminals?
I talked to all those people. I visited all those people.
And the 9 million voters, mine and those of Nicolas Dupont-Aignan, that you attempted to sully during the second round. That's a lot of people. That's millions of French people that you showed contempt for during the campaign. Slanderous work.
The French who have voted for you and for Mr. Dupont-Aignan, I have always respected them. I have never tried to deliver a lesson to them, a moral lesson. All I have to say,
they're there, they're in the countryside, they're in the towns, in the social networks.
I'm talking about your party, the party of the extreme right, the party that you lead, the party of the extreme, who you lie on the social network. You foster hatred, you molest journalists, and you behave in a very brutal way. Look at the campaign. And several times,
Never.
people have tried to threaten people participating in my meetings. So it's the party of the National Front, which is a party of the extreme right, which does not resemble our country, our France. I respect all your voters because they are angry, because they are disheartened. I come from a town that also voted for you, but they don't deserve your anger. You don't have any answers. You manipulate their anger, Madame Le Pen. That's all I have to say. You don't want to understand. You don't understand because you don't want to understand. They deserve better.
Thank you to both of you. We need to wrap up. Both of you wanted an opportunity to speak directly to the French people on a topic of your choice. You will each get 2 minutes. We'll start with Mr. Macron. You are 1 minute behind Mrs. Le Pen.
We've talked about many subjects, and also some subjects which we haven't mentioned. I very briefly referred to our overseas territories. This is essential. Our overseas territories, in my view, are an important stake for our economic improvement. And I would also like to say a word about disabled people. The law that Mrs. Le Pen wants to repeal repeal does propose pragmatic solutions for disabled people in our country. This law, and I will preserve this law, is to have in each company somebody who helps disabled people to have a normal working life. I want all those who are disabled to have pragmatic solutions. First of all, I will increase the subsidies. The handicapped, the disabled people are currently receiving financial aid which is keeps them below the poverty line. Second measure, I don't want disabled people anymore not to have any solutions. So a lot of jobs will be created in the educational system to help disabled pupils. And I will create jobs so that young autist children don't have to go abroad to be treated. And I want us to find concrete solutions to support disabled people in companies, in businesses, or in special care centres. That will be one of the priorities of my mandate. There are dozens of thousands of fellow citizens who are disabled and who have no solutions. They have no help, no support. We don't give any answers to their problems.
Mrs. Le Pen.
You're right. If you're so attached to disabilities, you should look at our project, because with Nicolas Dupont-Aignan, I believe we have the most complete project that takes account of all the issues, because I've included in my project the proposal of Nicolas Dupont-Aignan to grant a full tax rebate for a child with disabilities, because there's what one promises and there's what one doesn't deliver, notably the law of 2005 that in fact was never applied by any government, not even yours or any of the others. And that's really what people with disabilities are waiting for. You say that we need centres for children with autism so they don't have to go abroad. That's obvious. For years now it should have been done. But let me tell you that autistic disorders allows many children to be in school quite normally, and today the socialists, who given many lessons of generosity in every circumstance, often leave these children out of school because we're told they can't be received. There's funding for mass immigration, for medical coverage, for illegals who are reimbursed far better than the French people are reimbursed, who've contributed all that, because 1 out of 3 French people can't afford health care because we don't reserve national solidarity to our fellow citizens. The problem is solidarity is, if it's not national, then it disappears, and that's precisely what's happening today. We haven't discussed this.
Excuse me. We have to respect the allotted
Migration.
time. Is this still your wild card? I'm sorry, we need to calculate this right down to the second. If we give you another minute to your chosen topic, we will need to give another minute to Mr. Macron.
I have no chosen topic. It's a general philosophy, Mr. Macron. The France that you defend isn't France. It's a trading room in which, once again, it's the war of all against all. French employees will have to fight to preserve their jobs against posted workers. Companies will have to fight against one another in order to have the lowest wages or the longest working time in order to try and preserve markets. It's not at all my vision. I believe, once again, in solidarity. I think that France is a nation with a culture, with a people, with a hope that is the hope of being able to continue in conditions that are respectful conditions to trade with other nations of the world, to restore diplomacy. France was thrown into chaos by your friends, political, those who preceded them, in fact, by all those who are supporting you in this presidential campaign, who all more or less have a responsibility to bear for current situation. It's time to put things back in order and to make the choice of France, of this territory that you want to lead, but will be the place of all the wars, in fact, of all conflicts and all competition.
Thank you, Mrs. Le Pen. Mr. Macron, you have more than 2 minutes, but please stay exactly within the allotted time. You each get 2 minutes without interrupting each other to wrap up. This was randomized, so Mrs. Le Pen, you will go fine last.
We say no to what you are. We ask you to... your tactic is to dirty the reputation of your adversary, and you lie. You have no project for the country. You don't care about the country. Your project is to say to the French people, that person is a horrible person, she's dirty, he's dirty. Falsification and lying. Your project aims at exploiting lying and fear. And that's what nourished your father for decades and the extreme right and has made you what you are. That's why I don't want that for my country. My country is worth much more than that. The France I want will not be divided. And we must get out of a system that has co-produced. You're the co-product of the system that you criticize. You're a parasite. You live off it. Because the inefficiency of the policies of the left and the right, the ineffectiveness of the policies of the right and of the left is what nourishes the National Front, the Front National. I can see the anger of our fellow citizens. I can feel it. I can hear it. And I want to bring answers, in-depth answers by real policies of reform, of transforming the country, the reforms that have not been implemented for 30 years with our fellow citizens. So,
Europe by the whip.
No, I believe in a bottom-up construction with voluntary organizations, popular initiatives, real changes to fight against unemployment, to improve the school system, to transform the country, and to reconcile the country in 5 years. If I'm elected president, if we win the battle against terrorism, unemployment, and
MEDEF and CGT are calling to vote for you.
And to fight against the divisions, to fight against the divisions.
Calling to vote for you.
I'm worried about the state of our country. So all I want, I will do it. You have no project. Our fellow citizens can see it this evening. So in 5 years' time, I want a real renewal of France and the real renewal of our country. A new face for our country, a new political, not an extreme right country.
All the socialist MPs.
With policies which have never been implemented. I want a France
Say it.
Country, calm down, Madame Le Pen. The country deserves better.
Country deserves the truth. Who will be your Prime Minister?
That's the end of the debate. So let me finish very simply. I want to reconcile France, the opposite of what you want to do. And I want a France that is really transformed.
Okay, now each of you will have the opportunity to wrap up. 2 minutes without any interruptions from the other side.
Well, clearly, France, objectively, this evening, the French people have been seeing exactly what Macron's project was in mind. People will say, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I like France as it is. France, with its culture, with its heritage, with its language. You don't want to defend its culture that doesn't exist, Mr. Macron, with its borders, such that if there are no borders, then in fact there's no free and independent country, with its people that deserves to be better treated than to be thrown in a fratricidal war that will allow some to obtain a maximum of profits for themselves. That's the France that you want. That's to say, a France that's open to the four winds. Very often I'm the candidate of being open. You want to close factories, maternity wards, police stations, hospitals. The only thing you don't want to close is precisely the borders. You don't want the French people to have the key. You want France to be open to mass immigration. The business leaders, your friends, want that to exert downward pressure on wages. That's why you went to Algeria to sell us a migratory highway. With Algeria, you're in the hands of communities. It's the contrary to unity, the opposite of the Union of France and the French people, Mr. Macron. That's the plan aimed at destructuring our country, to weaken it, perhaps because it will ease the work of the financial powers at your side, seeking to derive profit from our country to serve themselves and not to serve it, of course.
Mr. Macron.
Madame Le Pen has used her entire conclusion to lie about my project without saying what she wants for our country. I don't want that for my country, for my France. I don't want people to benefit from the failures and to exploit anger. France deserves better. France, my country, our country, is going through a deep crisis, a moral crisis, which is due to the failures of policies over 20 years, the failure of our ability to unify the country. And some people exploit this anger. I would simply like to say I've listened to the doubts expressed by people and the anger. I want to answer by courage, the courage to tell the truth. I have never lied. I haven't said that I'm going to make gifts to donate and to promise things which are impossible to achieve. The courage to keep our commitments firmly and to maintain our school, the authority in our school system, to maintain our work, our language, to maintain our language. I read my book. I grew up with the French language, with our culture, and which has a global presence. Our country has always been strong in a strong Europe and in an open world, not a world open to the four winds, but a world in which we can defend ourselves, because we will have trained our fellow citizens, we will have a proactive approach. I refuse the spirit of defeatism and hatred, which is that of the Front National. Real reforms, real changes, and we will do that together, my dear fellow citizens, and we will do so by being faithful to what we are. We've always been a generous country, an open country, a country that was the light of the world and not obscurantism. Thank you.
Thank you, both of you. No, let's not get back into this.
This isn't a TV show. Yes, okay, carry on with your TV reality show. I want to preside over the destiny of our country.
These were your rules. Thank you for the debate. Thank you for those of you who watched us at home. I hope that this provided you more enlightenment on the choice for next Sunday. Have a good evening.